gas-fired power generation to generate your electricity. This is the transition fuel, by the way. Remember that gas industry stuff where they talked about gas being a transition fuel to renewables, and it was meant to be the big boom in gas usage? Well, in Australia, gas for gas-fired power generation is down 40% since 2014. 40%. So the gas demand is collapsing in Australia due to the ridiculously high prices and its uneconomic nature. Now, gas actually sets the price for electricity in the national electricity market. Now, how does it do that? Well, gas is the most expensive form of generation, and the way the national electricity market works is the highest bit of price bit of generation sets the price for that half-hour period. And gas is the last one into the market because it's so expensive here, and so it sets the price. And we all know that the wholesale price for electricity is very high, and that's causing a lot of grief, especially for industry and for small businesses and for domestic consumers. So the ACCC has estimated if you could bring down the price by $1 a gigajoule, it would bring down the electricity price by $11 a megawatt hour. Now that's a massive effect on the electricity price due to gas prices. So I just went away and looked at their numbers and just calculated that basically it would bring down the average electricity bill of about $1,600 for the average Australian domestic consumer by about $270 due to the price gouging that's occurring by the cartel of producers. Commercial and industrial users would obviously see a much larger effect because they're far more affected by the wholesale prices. So they would see their bills fall by 27%, which is massive. So what are the effects of developing this industry for Queensland? What actually are they? Well, Catherine Tanner, who used to be head of BG Group that developed the first plant up at Gladstone, she said that her company, BG Group, would be paying about $1 billion a year in federal taxes and a further $300 million in royalties soon after the plant started up in 2014, because these are massive investments up at Gladstone, so they want to run at full speed, right? They always want to run at 100% capacity because you've spent over $70 billion developing. Her optimism was shared by Anna Bligh at the time, who announced there would mean billions of dollars for the state's economy. Now, in 2014, budget royalties were expected to rise from 68 million from the existing petroleum industry up to 660 million. I think the figure was, isn't it? 660 million by 2016-17, but the result was only $98 million. So there's Catherine Tanner telling you that her company would be paying $300 million in royalties, and the entire industry was only paying $98 million in royalties. So the royalty stream really has been pretty pathetic. It's so bad that the current government decided to up the rate on royalties from 10 to 12.5%. Look, the 2019 to 20 budget, also has some pretty heroic forecasts for royalties going through the roof. I wouldn't hang your hat on them. Previously, in the past, they haven't come true. You are getting about 450 million now so the royalties have grown, but nowhere near to the extent that was predicted all those years ago. Taxes, on the other hand, have been very, very minimal. If we have a look, Catherine Tanner told everyone, she's now on the Reserve Bank board, by the way, she's one of our governors of the Reserve Bank, Catherine Tanner. She said BG Group would be paying, $1 billion in taxes by now. Last year they paid, in 2017, which was the last data dump you can get from the ATO, they paid no tax. BG was taken over by Shell, and it too pays no tax, income tax in Australia. The other two people that own plants at Gladstone are Santos and Origin, neither of which paid tax in 2016-17, according to the ATO data dump figures. There simply has not been the billions of dollars that Queenslanders were promised in developing this industry. It simply has not materialised. In fact, almost the reverse. Taxes have gone down from these companies, not up. Real estate, I'm talking about some local effects, some very localised effects. Look, very similar stories can be told about towns like Roma, Chinchilla, Miles, but I've taken Gladstone as my example here to show the wealth destruction that has occurred in these regional towns. It's been very material, the wealth that has been burnt, right? And this is an interview with a local real estate valuer. He said, we've seen a very active mortgagee in possession market. It's not really something you want to boast about if you're kind of in real estate, that a lot of people have gone bankrupt and had to hand their properties over to the bank. Values of townhouses and apartments have declined up to 75% and houses up to about 50%. Now this is people's, mum and dad, Joe Average's real wealth just getting absolutely trashed. And it's happened not just in Gladstone, but in Miles, Chinchilla, Roma. It's a very, very similar story. There was a boom, a short-lived boom, and when the construction phase was over, suddenly everyone left town because they didn't have a job anymore. And that's what's happened in Gladstone, Miles, Chinchilla, Roma. It's been a cookie cutter. Now, how good is the LNG industry? Well, like if you read a lot of the stuff in the newspapers, they go on about how successful it's been and how they're exporting to the world. Well, look, it is true in the Northwest Shelf and to some extent up in the Northern Territory. Certainly not the tax scene is similarly awful everywhere. But it has been a successful industry over there. In Australia, in Eastern Australia at Gladstone, it hasn't. As I said, these are very capital-intensive plants. You want to run them at full pace, right? You want to run them at 100% capacity all the time because you've got all this money invested in them. So how have they actually been running? Well, last year, 19% below capacity. That's a long way below their capacity. Particularly bad for Gladstone LNG, which is one of the three consortium up there, which is headed by Santos. They are 3 million tonnes below their nameplate capacity of 7.8 million tonnes. So what you're seeing is the CSG to LNG industry got its costs horribly wrong, both in terms of building the plants. They had massive cost overruns in building the plants, and then not only that, when they went to find the gas, they found that the gas simply wasn't there in the quantities they thought it was. And the costs subsequently were much, much higher. So, it hasn't been a successful industry, the coal seam gas to LNG industry. It really has been a bit of a failed experiment. And what that's actually meant is you've seen this rolling series of write-offs by Origin, Santos, the listed companies that are in this space that you can actually get numbers for, have written billions of dollars off their investments over the last few years. So how do we get around this? What can we actually do about it? We can have some constructive policy. We can actually have something called an energy policy, something that's kind of lacking in Australia at both a state and a federal government level. Wouldn't that be wonderful to have an energy policy? Anyway, we can have a policy and we can put in a domestic gas reservation at $5 a gigajoule. This is not a radical idea. It is not something that isn't done elsewhere. You don't have to look very far to see one. You can look to Western Australia. They've actually got one. They've got wholesale gas prices around about $4. I'm not suggesting one that low. They do have lower production costs over there. I do think the industry should make money. I do think you do need to stimulate the ability for the industry to survive, but not at the prices that they're selling us gas. Essentially, they're surviving and exporting by selling expensive gas to the locals and cheap gas offshore. And that's just not right. Domestic gas reservation policies are very common right around the world. Nearly every country has one of one sort or another. In Eastern Australia, we're pretty uniquely silly, in that we don't. So that's really the big one. I think also we've also got to look at the demand side. We really don't need gas for domestic dwellings anymore, for heating. If you actually look, the whole gas thing, the idea of using gas for heating was started off in Victoria and the southern states when BHP was, basically produced oil, first of all, in the Bass Strait. Gas was a byproduct. They used to just flare it. And then what happened was that they went, okie doke, we want to stimulate a market, so they got domestic people to use gas. So those days have passed. It's no longer a byproduct. They do actually just export just for gas in the Bass Strait. But we don't need it in houses anymore, principally because it's cheaper to heat your house with a modern reverse cycle air conditioner. Times have changed. Those economics have changed. For domestic usage, it's cheaper to use electricity. So if we look, there are a number of other sort of very simple things, simple policy responses that I'll leave you with that are there. But really, we need to look at both the demand and the supply. The demand side of gas. That's one of the key ways to fix the current problem, is to look at demand. So on that note, I will leave you. So thank you very much for having me here today.